You will not believe what I heard my son planning when I came home early from my trip. Have you ever discovered that the people you trust most are the ones plotting against you? Today, I am sharing a story that will make you think twice about family loyalty. If you are dealing with difficult relatives or worried about aging parents, this one's for you. Drop a comment and let me know if you have experienced anything similar. Your story might help someone else. And don't forget to hit that like button if this resonates with you. The thunderstorms around Dallas had been absolutely fierce that October afternoon, with lightning splitting the sky like angry veins and rain hammering against the terminal windows at DFW Airport. I had been sitting in the departure lounge for 3 hours, watching flight after flight get canceled on the electronic boards, listening to increasingly frustrated announcements about weather delays and passenger rebooking. My arthritis was acting up something terrible in the changing pressure, that familiar deep ache settling into my joints like an old enemy making itself comfortable. I wasn't supposed to return from my sister Ruth's house in Tulsa until Wednesday evening. The plan had been to spend another full day helping her organize photos from our mother's estate, maybe take one more walk through her beautiful garden before the first frost hit Oklahoma. But as I sat there in that uncomfortable airport chair, surrounded by irritated travelers and the constant drone of delayed flight announcements, I made an executive decision that would change everything. "Madam," I said to the young woman behind the airline counter, her name tag reading Stephanie in cheerful blue letters. "Instead of rebooking me for tomorrow, could you get me on the first flight out in the morning? I would rather sleep in my own bed tonight." Stephanie's fingers flew across her keyboard, her long acrylic nails clicking against the keys like tiny castanets. "Actually, Mrs. Patterson, we have a 6 a.m. departure that just opened up. Weather's supposed to clear by then, and you would be in Dallas by 8:30. At 72 years old, I had learned that comfort becomes more precious with each passing year, and home had been calling to me all week. My own heating pad for this arthritis. My familiar chair with the perfect lumps and dips worn in by 40 years of evening reading. My garden where I could check on the late-season tomatoes I had been nursing along despite the early cold snap. The taxi ride from DFW to my house in Richardson took 45 minutes through morning traffic, past strip malls and subdivisions that had sprouted up like mushrooms since Henry and I first moved to the neighborhood. In 1987, the driver, a friendly middle-aged man with a thick Ethiopian accent, told me about his daughter, who was studying nursing at UT Dallas. I found myself thinking about Jessica, my daughter-in-law, who had graduated from that same program 3 years ago. She was working at Presbyterian Hospital now, doing so well in their cardiac unit. Michael and Jessica had volunteered eagerly to sit while I was gone. "It will be perfect, Mom," Michael had said, that boyish smile spreading across his 42-year-old face. "Our apartment's air conditioning is on the fritz again, and the landlord says it will not be fixed until next week. We could really use a break from sleeping in that heat." Jessica had nodded enthusiastically, her blonde hair catching the light as she bounced slightly on her toes. "And I can take care of your plants. You know how much I love that herb garden you have been working on. Maybe I can even get some tips for when we finally buy our own house." I had felt genuinely grateful for their offer. After Henry passed 3 years ago from that sudden heart attack, the house sometimes felt too quiet, too empty, filled with echoes of conversations that would never happen again and the phantom sounds of his morning coffee routine. The thought of my son and his wife bringing some life back into those rooms, hearing laughter in the kitchen again, maybe the sound of the television during their evening shows, had warmed my heart in a way I hadn't expected. I had even left detailed instructions for Jessica about my prize, winning tomatoes, the ones that had taken second place at the Richardson Garden Club competition, just last month. "The Cherokee purples need water every other day," I had written in my careful script, "but don't water the leaves directly or they will get blight. And if you see any hornworms, just pluck them off by hand. I know it is gross, but it is the only way to really protect the plants." The taxi dropped me off just after noon, and I stood for a moment on the front walkway, taking in the sight of my modest brick ranch house with its white trim and the carefully maintained flower beds that bordered the front porch. Everything looked perfect. The lawn had been freshly mowed in neat diagonal stripes. The flower beds were tidy with no signs of the usual October leaf scatter. And someone had even swept the front porch and arranged the decorative pumpkins I had left in a more pleasing configuration. My heart swelled with appreciation for their thoughtfulness. This was exactly the kind of care and attention I had hoped for. The kind that made me feel loved and valued, rather than like a burden they would reluctantly agree to shoulder. I had planned to surprise them completely, maybe catch them having a lazy lunch in the kitchen, sharing one of Jessica's famous grilled cheese sandwiches and tomato soup combinations. I could picture Michael reading her something amusing from his phone while she laughed. That musical laugh that had first charmed me when he would brought her home 5 years ago. I had stories to share about Ruth's newest great-grandbaby, little Emma, and photos on my phone of her, taking her first wobbly steps across Ruth's living room. But instead of going straight to the front door, I decided to retrieve my spare key from its hiding place behind the garden shed. It was an old habit from the days when Henry and I would sometimes return from trips to find we would both forgotten our keys, and it had saved us more than once from having to call a locksmith. As I made my way around the side of the house, past the jasmine bush that was still blooming, despite the October chill, I heard voices drifting through the partially open kitchen window. The breeze was just right to carry the sound clearly, and I recognized Jessica's voice immediately, that sweet soprano tone she used when she was discussing her work schedule or planning weekend activities. But her words stopped me dead in my tracks. My hand frozen halfway to the hidden key box. The memory medication should start showing more pronounced effects within another week or so. She was saying, her tone as matter, of fact as if she were discussing the weather or grocery shopping. Dr. Martinez said the dosage we have been using will create enough documented confusion to justify the formal evaluation. The cognitive decline needs to appear progressive for the court to accept our petition. I felt my knees go weak, and I had to grab the fence post to steady myself. Memory medication, documented confusion, court petition. The words swirled in my head like leaves in a tornado, each one hitting me with increasing force. There was a pause, filled only by the sound of someone moving around the kitchen chairs, scraping. Cabinet doors opening and closing. Then Michael's voice, deeper and strained in a way I would rarely heard from my usually confident son. "Are you absolutely certain we need to go this far, Jess? She has been forgetting little things naturally. Last month, she called me twice about the same doctor's appointment, and she has been repeating stories more often. Natural decline isn't sufficient for legal purposes," Jessica replied with the crisp authority of someone who would clearly researched this thoroughly. "The probate court requires documented evidence of significant cognitive impairment to grant guardianship. What you are describing could be normal aging. We need clear, medical documentation of incompetence, and the supplements I have been mixing into her evening tea will provide exactly the evidence pattern we need." My blood turned to ice water in my veins, supplements in my evening tea. The chamomile tea that Jessica had been so thoughtfully preparing for me every night for the past month. The tea she had insisted would help with my sleep and my evening restlessness. The tea I had been gratefully drinking, touched by her consideration and care. Plus, Jessica continued, and I could hear papers rustling. I have been keeping detailed notes about her supposed confusion episodes for the past 6 weeks, date, time, witnesses, specific behaviors. Dr. Martinez will review my documentation and conduct what appears to be an independent evaluation, but he will essentially be confirming what I have already established. The man owes me several favors from when I helped cover up his prescription irregularities at the hospital. I pressed myself against the side of the house, my heart hammering so hard I was afraid they might hear it. Every word was a knife twisting deeper into my chest, into my trust, into everything I thought I knew about these people I had welcomed into my family. Once the guardianship goes through, Jessica's voice continued with increasing confidence, we will have complete legal control over her finances and medical decisions. The house alone is worth at least $400,000 in this market, probably more. Her retirement accounts are substantial. I saw the statements when I was helping her organize her desk last month. Plus, there is the life insurance policy and her late husband's pension benefits. Michael's voice was barely audible when he responded. I just keep thinking about Dad, about what he would say if he knew what we were doing. Your father isn't here anymore, Michael. Jessica's tone sharpened with impatience. And Eleanor is declining whether we intervene or not. Look at her realistically. She is 72 years old, living alone in a house that is too big for her, trying to maintain independence that is frankly becoming dangerous. We are simply ensuring that her assets are managed responsibly, instead of being frittered away on expensive senior living facilities or round-the-clock home health care. There was another pause, longer this time, and I could hear Michael moving around, perhaps pacing the way he used to when he was nervous as a child. Besides, Jessica added, her voice taking on a tone of false reasonableness, this way the money stays in the family where it belongs, where she would want it to go eventually anyway. We are just accelerating the timeline for everyone's benefit. She will not have to worry about making difficult decisions anymore, and we can ensure she receives appropriate care while preserving the estate. The casual, business-like way they were discussing dismantling my life made my stomach lurch. This wasn't the loving daughter-in-law who had helped me choose new curtains for the guest room last spring, who had spent an afternoon teaching me how to use the new coffee maker Michael had bought me for my birthday. This wasn't the sweet young woman who had sent me thoughtful Mother's Day cards and always remembered to ask about my book club meetings. This was a calculating stranger wearing Jessica's face, discussing my future like I was already dead, like I was an obstacle to be managed, rather than a person with my own desires and rights. But even as horror and betrayal washed over me in waves, something else began to take root in my chest. Something harder and more determined than fear. Something that reminded me of the woman who had survived the Depression as a child in rural Kansas, who had worked 2 jobs to put Michael through college when Henry's hours got cut at the plant, who had nursed her husband through his final illness while managing their family's finances and maintaining her own full-time work schedule. I wasn't some helpless old woman to be manipulated and discarded, like yesterday's newspaper. I had been making difficult decisions and protecting my family for over 5 decades. I had weathered financial crises, health scares, family emergencies, and the death of my life partner. I had resources they couldn't see and strength they would clearly underestimated. I carefully backed away from the window, moving as quietly as possible across the grass and around to the front of the house. My hands were trembling as I retrieved my keys from my purse, but my mind was already beginning to plan. Whatever performance they expected from a confused elderly woman, I would give them exactly that. But behind the mask of confusion, I would be watching, recording, gathering evidence, and preparing my counterattack. The key turned smoothly in the front door lock, and I called out in my most cheerful voice, "Michael, Jessica, I am home early." The storms in Dallas were just terrible. I heard immediate scrambling sounds from the kitchen chairs scraping hastily across the floor, papers rustling, hushed whispers. Then Jessica appeared in the hallway, wiping her hands on a dish towel and wearing that brilliant smile I now recognized as carefully constructed rather than genuine. "Eleanor, what a wonderful surprise," she exclaimed, moving toward me with open arms. "How was your flight? We weren't expecting you until tomorrow evening." "I hope everything went smoothly, despite the weather." "Oh, you know how these autumn storms can be," I replied, allowing her embrace while studying her face with new eyes. How had I missed the calculation behind those clear blue eyes? How had I failed to notice the way her smiles never quite reached them? They canceled half the flights out of Tulsa, so I decided to take the early morning departure instead of sitting around the airport for another day. Michael emerged from the kitchen, and I noticed immediately that something was different about his posture. There was a stiffness in his shoulders, a careful quality to his movements that hadn't been there when I had left for Oklahoma. His smile seemed forced, not reaching his eyes the way it usually did. "Welcome home, Mom," he said, giving me a quick hug that felt perfunctory rather than affectionate. "How is Aunt Ruth doing? Did you get those photo albums sorted out?" "Oh, she is doing wonderfully. That new great-grandbaby is just precious as can be," I replied, setting my suitcase down near the door and glancing around the living room with what I hoped appeared to be casual interest. Everything looked normal on the surface, but now I was noticing details I had missed before: a notebook on the side table that Jessica quickly moved when she thought I wasn't looking, Michael's position near the hallway that led to the medicine cabinet, the way they both seemed slightly on edge despite their welcoming words. "You look tired, Eleanor," Jessica said, with what I now recognized as false concern. "Long travel days can be so exhausting at our age. Why don't you sit down in your favorite chair? I will make you some of that chamomile tea you love so much. It will help you relax and settle back in." The offer sent ice through my veins, but I forced myself to smile gratefully. "That sounds absolutely perfect, dear. You are so thoughtful. My arthritis has been acting up something fierce with all this weather changing. I could definitely use something soothing." As Jessica bustled toward the kitchen with what now appeared to be suspicious eagerness, I settled into my favorite armchair, the blue recliner Henry had bought me for my 60th birthday, worn soft in all the right places. I began planning my performance. If they wanted a confused, declining old woman, they would certainly get one. But I would also be documenting every conversation, every suspicious moment, every piece of evidence of their betrayal. The tea Jessica brought me a few minutes later smelled completely normal chamomile with that hint of honey she always added, just the way she had been preparing it for weeks. The cup was my favorite, the delicate porcelain one with tiny blue flowers that had belonged to my mother. But knowing what I now knew, I detected something else underneath the familiar scents, something slightly medicinal that made my stomach turn with revulsion. I raised the cup to my lips, letting the warmth touch them, and pretended to take a small sip. The liquid barely touched my tongue before I set the cup aside, making sure to leave it in clear view so they could see I was drinking it. "This is absolutely lovely," I said, making sure my words slurred just slightly at the edges. "I think I might need a little rest after all that traveling. The whole trip has left me feeling more scattered than usual." Jessica's eyes lit up with what I now recognized as satisfaction rather than concern. She exchanged a quick glance with Michael that confirmed everything I would overheard. "Of course, Eleanor. Rest is exactly what you need after such a long day. Michael and I will take care of everything around here. You don't need to worry about a single thing." We sat together in the living room for the next hour, and I began my careful performance. Jessica asked polite questions about Ruth's family, about the flight, about my plans for the rest of the week. I answered slowly, letting my words trail off occasionally as if I had lost my train of thought. I mentioned calling my neighbor Margaret about watering the plants, then corrected myself and said I would meant to call about feeding the cats I hadn't owned in 5 years. Michael stayed mostly quiet, but I could see him watching me carefully, his eyes tracking every apparent confusion, every small lapse. When I asked him to remind me of the name of his colleague from work, a man I would met dozens of times at family gatherings, he obliged with what appeared to be patient concern, but was actually hungry documentation of my supposed decline. That evening, I unpacked my suitcase with deliberate slowness, taking frequent breaks as if the simple task was overwhelming me. I folded my clothes carefully, putting my sweaters in the dresser drawer where I normally kept underwear, then correcting myself with apparent confusion. All the while, I was acutely aware that Jessica was finding excuses to walk past my bedroom, observing my behavior, and undoubtedly taking mental notes for her detailed records. Later, as the sun set and the house settled into its evening rhythm, I sat in the living room pretending to struggle with the television remote. Jessica appeared with a small tray containing cookies she had baked, oatmeal raisin, my favorite, and another cup of that chamomile tea. "I thought you might like a little snack," she said, setting the tray on the side table within easy reach, "and this tea will help you sleep better tonight. I know traveling can disrupt our normal routines." I nodded gratefully, making sure to pick up the cup and bring it to my lips for appearance's sake. "You are so good to me, Jessica. I don't know what I would do without you and Michael looking after me." When she left the room, I carefully poured the contents of the cup into the large potted fern that sat beside my chair, then returned to my seat with the empty cup. Within minutes, I could see her peeking around the corner to check on me, nodding with satisfaction when she saw the empty cup in my hands. This was definitely not the house I had left behind 5 days ago, and I was certainly not the helpless old woman they thought they were manipulating. I stared out the window for a long time that night, not in fear, but with growing determination. Every performance has a beginning, and I had just taken my place on a stage where the stakes were nothing less than my freedom and dignity. The next morning dawned crisp and clear, with that particular quality of October light that makes everything look sharp, edged, and purposeful. I woke early, as had been my habit for decades, and lay in bed for several minutes, listening to the sounds of the house. Michael and Jessica were already moving around downstairs. I could hear the coffee maker gurgling to life, cabinet doors opening and closing, the murmur of quiet conversation. I rose slowly, making sure my movements were deliberate but slightly unsteady, and made my way to the bathroom. In the mirror, I practiced the expression I would need: a little confused, a little vacant, but not dramatically different from my normal appearance. The key was subtlety. Too much of a performance, and they might become suspicious. Too little, and they wouldn't believe their plan was working. I dressed carefully in the cardigan and slacks Jessica had complimented me on last week, the outfit that made me look comfortable but slightly frail. Then I made my way downstairs, gripping the banister perhaps a bit more tightly than necessary. "Good morning, sweetheart," I said to Jessica, who was standing at the stove making scrambled eggs. "Did you sleep well? I had the strangest dreams last night. Something about Henry being in the garden, but he was much younger. Like when we first moved here," Jessica turned with that practiced smile. "Dreams can be so vivid sometimes, cannot they? Especially when we are adjusting to being back home. How are you feeling this morning?" "Oh, a little tired still, and confused, I suppose. It takes me longer to remember things than it used to." I made my way to the kitchen table, moving slowly and pausing to steady myself against the counter. I couldn't remember where I would put my reading glasses, and then I found them in the refrigerator of all places. Isn't that silly? Of course, I hadn't put my glasses in the refrigerator at all. They were safely in their usual spot on my bedside table. But Jessica's eyes sharpened with interest, and I saw her glance toward Michael, who was reading something on his phone at the breakfast table. "That happens to all of us sometimes," Jessica said smoothly. "I once found my car keys in the pantry. Stress and travel can really affect our memory." I nodded slowly, as if accepting this explanation, then asked, "Jessica, dear, did I take my blood pressure medication this morning? I cannot seem to recall, and I don't want to take it twice by accident." "Yes, Eleanor. You took it about 20 minutes ago," she replied without hesitation. "I watched you take it with your orange juice." I hadn't taken any medication at all that morning, but I nodded, as if reassured. "Oh good, thank you for keeping track." I get so worried about mixing up my pills. Michael looked up from his phone, his expression carefully neutral. "Mom, maybe we should set up one of those pill organizers for you, the kind with compartments for each day of the week. It might help you keep track better." "That is a wonderful idea," I said. Though the suggestion made my skin crawl. A pill organizer would make it much easier for them to monitor and control my medication. "You are both so thoughtful, always looking out for me." The performance continued throughout the morning. I shuffled slightly when I walked, paused mid-sentence as if losing my train of thought, and asked Jessica to remind me of things I knew perfectly well. I called Michael by his father's name twice, then corrected myself with apparent confusion. I opened the refrigerator and stood there for a long moment, as if I had forgotten what I was looking for. Their reactions confirmed everything I would overheard the day before. Jessica was documenting my every apparent lapse, her eyes bright with satisfaction whenever I displayed confusion. Michael watched me with what might have looked like concern to an outside observer, but which I now recognized as the focused attention of someone gathering evidence. By afternoon, I knew I needed to take action. While they were both outside discussing something in hushed tones on the back patio, I made my way to my bedroom and retrieved the small digital recorder I had used years ago for work. It was an older model, but it still functioned perfectly, and its small size made it easy to conceal in the deep pockets of my cardigans or beneath the cushions of my favorite chair. I also retrieved a notebook from my desk drawer and began writing down everything I could remember from the conversation I would overheard. Dr. Martinez, memory medication, guardianship, petition, detailed notes about supposed confusion episodes. I wrote quickly but carefully, making sure every detail was accurate and legible. That evening, as we sat down for dinner, I continued my performance. I asked Jessica to pass the salt, then called her by the name of Michael's previous girlfriend, a woman he had dated briefly in college 15 years ago. I apologized with apparent confusion, then made the same mistake again 10 minutes later. "I am sorry, dear," I said, shaking my head as if trying to clear it. "I don't know why I keep getting mixed up. Are you feeling all right? You look tired." Jessica exchanged another meaningful glance with Michael. "I am fine, Eleanor. Just a long day at work. Maybe you should get some rest after dinner." After they had gone to bed, I lay awake planning my next moves. I needed legal advice, and I needed it quickly. I also needed to document their conversations without putting myself in danger. Most importantly, I needed to protect my assets before they could move forward with their guardianship petition. The next morning, while Michael was at work and Jessica was running errands, I called my old friend Patricia Chen from the phone in my bedroom. Patricia had retired 2 years ago after 30 years practicing elder law. But she had remained sharp and well-connected in the legal community. "Patricia?" I said when she answered, keeping my voice low. "It is Eleanor Patterson. I need your help with something urgent, and I cannot discuss it over the phone. Can we meet somewhere private this afternoon?" Patricia's voice immediately sharpened with concern. "Of course, Eleanor. What is wrong? You sound frightened." "I am frightened," I admitted. "But I am also angry, and I need advice about how to protect myself." "Can we meet at that little coffee shop on Spring Valley Road? The one tucked behind the bookstore? I will be there at 2 o'clock, Patricia said without hesitation. "And Eleanor, if you are in immediate danger, don't wait. Call 911 or go directly to the police station." "It is not that kind of danger," I said. "But it is serious." "Thank you, Patricia." I spent the rest of the morning maintaining my performance. When Jessica returned from her errands, I asked her to help me remember whether I had already eaten lunch, even though it was only 10 in the morning. I wandered into the laundry room carrying a book and seemed confused about why I was there. I stood in front of the open refrigerator for several minutes, mumbling about looking for something but unable to remember what. At 1:30, I told Jessica I was going to my weekly appointment at the beauty salon, something I had been doing every Thursday for 15 years. She offered to drive me, but I insisted I could manage, saying the routine was important for maintaining my independence. "I will be back in a couple of hours," I said, grabbing my purse and keys. "Don't worry about me. Mary always makes sure I get home safely." The coffee shop was exactly as I remembered it: small, quiet, with mismatched chairs, and the kind of atmosphere that encouraged private conversations. Patricia was already there when I arrived, seated in a corner booth with her back to the wall. She stood and embraced me warmly, but I could see the concern in her eyes. "Tell me everything," she said, once we were seated with our coffee. I told her about overhearing the conversation, about the medication in my tea, about Jessica's detailed notes and the planned guardianship petition. Patricia listened, without interruption, her expression growing grimmer with each revelation. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair and studied me carefully. "Eleanor, this is textbook elder abuse and fraud," she said quietly. "What they are doing is not only morally reprehensible, it is criminal. We need to document everything and move quickly to protect you." She pulled out a legal pad and began taking notes as I provided every detail I could remember. Names, dates, specific conversations, the medication in my tea, Jessica's connection to Dr. Martinez. Patricia's pen moved rapidly across the page, and I could see her legal mind working through the implications. "First priority is protecting your assets," she said. "Do you have a current will and power of attorney?" "Yes, both drawn up by Jim Carson 5 years ago, but I need to update them immediately. Michael is currently listed as my primary beneficiary and backup power of attorney. We will fix that today. I am going to call Jim and ask him to meet us at his office this afternoon. We will also need to document your current mental competency with an independent neuropsychologist, and we need to consider involving the authorities. What about the medication they are giving me? I have been pouring out the tea, but I am worried about what damage might already be done. Patricia's jaw tightened. We will have you examined by a doctor I trust, someone who can test for whatever they have been giving you and document any effects. We will also need a sample of that tea if possible. We spent another hour planning our strategy. Patricia would coordinate with Jim Carson to restructure my legal documents immediately. She would also contact Dr. Sarah Kim, a neuropsychologist who specialized in elder competency evaluations, to schedule an emergency assessment. Most importantly, she would begin gathering evidence for potential criminal charges. Eleanor, she said, as we prepared to leave, you are going to need to continue your performance for a few more days while we put everything in place. Can you do that? I have been acting for 3 days already, I replied. I can certainly manage a few more, but I want them to face consequences for what they have tried to do. They will, Patricia said firmly. What they have done to you is unconscionable, and they are going to pay for it. That evening, I returned home with a story about getting my hair trimmed and having a nice chat with Mary about her grandson's college plans. Jessica seemed pleased that I had maintained my routine, commenting that keeping up social activities was important for mental health. During dinner, Michael brought up the subject of planning for the future in what he probably thought was a casual way. Mom, Jessica and I have been talking, and we think it might be time to start making some arrangements, he said, cutting his pork chop with unnecessary precision. You know, just to make sure you are taken care of as you get older. I looked at him with what I hoped appeared to be mild confusion. What kind of arrangements, sweetheart? I thought we had already handled most of that when your father passed. Legal arrangements, Jessica interjected smoothly. So that if you ever need help making decisions about your health or finances, someone you trust can step in to help. It is really just a precaution, but it is important to have everything in place. Oh, like those power of attorney forms Henry and I signed years ago, I asked, though my stomach was churning at their casual discussion of stripping away my independence. Something like that, but more comprehensive, Michael said. Jessica knows a doctor who specializes in these kinds of evaluations. He can assess your current situation and help us make sure everything is set up properly. The way he said current situation made my skin crawl, but I nodded uncertainly. I suppose that makes sense. I have been feeling more scattered lately, haven't I? It is nothing to worry about, Jessica said with false reassurance. Dr. Martinez is very experienced with these types of assessments. He will just ask you some questions, maybe do a few simple tests. It is all very routine. Dr. Martinez, the corrupt doctor who was apparently willing to sign fraudulent competency evaluations in exchange for favors from Jessica. I made a mental note to have Patricia investigate his credentials and ethics record immediately. When would this happen? I asked, letting a slight tremor enter my voice. Soon, Jessica said. These things can take time to process through the legal system, so it is better to start early. We are thinking maybe next week. That night, after they had gone to bed, I lay awake staring at the ceiling and processing the full scope of their betrayal. They weren't just planning to steal my money, they were planning to steal my entire life. Once they had guardianship, they could control where I lived, what medical care I received, who I was allowed to see. They could isolate me completely, and I would have no legal recourse. But they had made one crucial mistake. They had underestimated the woman they were trying to destroy. The next morning, Patricia called bright and early with updates. She had spoken with Jim Carson, who had cleared his schedule for an emergency meeting that afternoon. Dr. Kim could see me for a competency evaluation on Saturday morning. Most importantly, Patricia had contacted the Dallas County District Attorney's Office, and they were very interested in what we had to tell them. Eleanor, we are moving fast, but we need physical evidence, Patricia said. Can you get a sample of that tea they have been giving you? I will find a way, I promised. That evening, Jessica brought me my usual cup of chamomile tea, and I accepted it with my customary gratitude. But this time, instead of pouring it into the plant, I carefully saved a small amount in a prescription bottle I had hidden in my bedroom. The liquid looked innocent enough, pale golden, with tiny particles floating near the bottom, that could have been tea leaves, but now seemed sinister. I also began leaving the digital recorder running during their evening conversations. Hidden beneath the cushion of my chair, it captured Jessica and Michael discussing the timeline for their plan. Their confidence that Dr. Martinez would provide the evaluation they needed, and their casual assumption that I was too confused to understand what was happening to me. "She is declining faster than I expected," Jessica said one evening, while they thought I was napping. "Yesterday she asked me 3 times when you were coming home from work, and she couldn't remember the neighbor's name." "Are you sure the medication isn't too strong?" Michael asked. "I don't want her to end up actually damaged." "The dosage is carefully calibrated," Jessica replied. "Enough to create documented symptoms, but not enough to cause permanent harm. Though, honestly, at her age, some cognitive decline is inevitable. Anyway, we are just helping it along." Their casual discussion of helping along my mental decline made me feel physically ill, but I forced myself to remain still and continue breathing deeply as if asleep. Every word was being recorded, every admission of guilt captured for the authorities. By Friday, I had enough evidence to bury them both. Patricia had scheduled a meeting with the DA's office for Monday morning, and Jim Carson had already begun the process of restructuring my estate to remove Michael from any position of authority. Dr. Kim had confirmed her availability for the competency evaluation, and I had provided the tea sample to a laboratory for analysis. But I wanted one more piece of evidence. I wanted to record them discussing their plans with Dr. Martinez directly. Saturday morning, I told Jessica and Michael that I was going to the farmer's market with my neighbor Margaret, something I did most weekends. Instead, I drove to Dr. Kim's office for my competency evaluation. The assessment took 2 hours and covered everything from basic cognitive function to complex problem-solving skills. "Mrs. Patterson," Dr. Kim said afterward, "you show no signs of dementia, Alzheimer's, or any other significant cognitive impairment. Your memory, reasoning ability, and judgment are all well within normal ranges for someone your age. In fact, your cognitive function is quite impressive. What about the memory issues I have been experiencing? The confusion about simple things?" Dr. Kim frowned. "From what you have described, and based on my examination, those symptoms are not consistent with natural cognitive decline. If you have been experiencing sudden onset confusion and memory problems, we need to consider external factors. Have you been taking any new medications?" I told her about the tea, about Jessica's nursing background, about the planned guardianship. Dr. Kim's expression grew increasingly concerned. "Mrs. Patterson, what you are describing sounds like deliberate pharmaceutical manipulation. Depending on what substances they have been giving you, this could be extremely dangerous. I am going to recommend that you see Dr. Williams at Presbyterian Hospital immediately for a comprehensive evaluation." She provided me with a written report documenting my cognitive competency, along with her professional opinion that my recent symptoms were not consistent with natural aging or dementia. She also gave me a sealed letter for the authorities, detailing her findings and her concerns about potential elder abuse. That afternoon, I went to Dr. Williams for blood work and a complete physical examination. The blood tests would reveal exactly what Jessica had been putting in my tea, providing definitive proof of the drugging. Dr. Williams also documented my excellent physical health, noting that aside from mild arthritis, I was in remarkable condition for a woman my age. Sunday evening, as I sat in my chair pretending to doze while Jessica and Michael discussed their plans in hushed tones, I felt a strange sense of peace. The performance was almost over. Tomorrow, Patricia and I would meet with the district attorney. Tomorrow, the authorities would have everything they needed to pursue criminal charges. Tomorrow, my son and his wife would learn that the confused old woman they had been manipulating was actually the architect of their downfall. "The appointment with Dr. Martinez is set for Tuesday," Jessica was saying. "He will conduct the evaluation and sign the paperwork. The guardianship petition should be filed by the end of the week." "And you are sure he will cooperate?" Michael asked. Completely. He knows I have documentation of his prescription irregularities. Plus, this evaluation will be completely legitimate from his perspective. Based on my notes, Mrs. Patterson clearly suffers from progressive dementia requiring immediate intervention. What about her finances? How quickly can we access her accounts once the guardianship is approved? Within days, I have already identified all her major assets: the house, the retirement accounts, the investment portfolios, the life insurance policies. Once we have legal authority, we can begin liquidating everything systematically. I continued breathing deeply and evenly, as if lost in sleep, while they planned the destruction of my independence and the theft of everything I had worked for throughout my life. But instead of fear or despair, I felt only cold determination. They had no idea that their victim had become their hunter. Monday morning arrived crisp and clear, with the kind of autumn sunshine that makes everything look clean and full of possibility. I dressed carefully in my best navy suit, the one I had worn to Henry's funeral and to Michael's wedding. If this was going to be a day of reckoning, I wanted to look like the competent, dignified woman I had always been. At exactly 9 of the clock, Patricia and I walked into the Dallas County District Attorney's office with a briefcase full of evidence. The prosecutor assigned to elder abuse cases, Assistant Da Maria Santos, listened to our story with increasing outrage. The recorded conversations, the medical evidence of drugging, the fraudulent guardianship petition, Dr. Kim's competency evaluation, everything painted a clear picture of systematic elder abuse and fraud. This is one of the most comprehensive elder abuse cases I have seen, Santos said after reviewing our documentation. We have enough evidence for multiple felony charges against both defendants. I will have warrants issued immediately. By 10 of the clock, Jessica and Michael's fate was sealed. By 10:30, I had filed the revised estate documents that removed Michael from any authority over my affairs and designated Patricia as my healthcare proxy and financial power of attorney. By 11 of the clock, I had moved my major bank accounts to institutions where Michael had no access or knowledge. The most satisfying moment came when I met with my investment advisor, Robert Chen, and instructed him to liquidate my portfolio, not because I was incompetent, but because I was planning to donate the proceeds to elder advocacy organizations. The money that Jessica and Michael had planned to steal would instead be used to protect other vulnerable seniors from similar abuse. I was having lunch at my favorite restaurant downtown when the arrests took place. I would deliberately arrange to be away from the house because, despite everything, I couldn't bear to watch my son being led away in handcuffs. Patricia called me just after 1 of the clock to confirm that both Jessica and Michael were in custody. "It is done, Eleanor," she said simply. "They are both facing multiple felony charges, and the evidence is overwhelming. They will likely be offered plea deals, but they are looking at serious prison time either way." When I finally returned home that evening, the house felt different. Police tape blocked off the kitchen, where they had found Jessica's stash of medications and her detailed notes documenting my supposed decline. Yellow evidence markers dotted the living room where they had discovered the fraudulent guardianship documents hidden in Michael's briefcase. I walked through the rooms slowly, seeing everything with new eyes. The chair where I had performed confusion while secretly recording their plans. The kitchen where they would methodically drugged my tea while discussing my future as if I were already dead. The family photos that now felt like evidence of a love that had been corrupted into something I barely recognized. The weeks that followed were a blur of legal proceedings, media attention, and the strange process of rebuilding a life that had been nearly destroyed by the people closest to me. Jessica was charged with elder abuse, fraud, practicing medicine without a license, and conspiracy. Michael faced charges of conspiracy, financial exploitation, and fraud. Their defense attorneys tried various strategies claiming I was vindictive, arguing that they had been trying to help me, insisting that Jessica's actions had been medically justified. But the evidence was too comprehensive, too damning. The recordings spoke for themselves. Dr. Martinez was also arrested when investigators discovered his pattern of signing fraudulent competency evaluations in exchange for various favors from healthcare workers. The laboratory analysis of my tea revealed a cocktail of substances designed to create confusion and memory problems without causing obvious physical symptoms. The trial proceedings took months to resolve completely. Jessica ultimately pled guilty to reduced charges and was sentenced to 3 years in prison, losing her nursing license permanently. Michael received 18 months and was ordered to pay substantial restitution. Neither of them showed genuine remorse during the sentencing hearings. Jessica maintained that she had been trying to help me manage my declining years more effectively. Michael claimed he had been manipulated by his wife and hadn't fully understood the implications of their actions. I attended every hearing, sitting in the front row where they could see me clearly. I wanted them to understand that the confused old woman they had tried to destroy was actually sharp, determined, and completely capable of defending herself. I wanted them to know that underestimating someone because of their age had been their fatal mistake. But the real victory wasn't their conviction. It was what I did with my second chance at independence. Within 6 months of the trial's conclusion, I had established the Henry Patterson Foundation for Elder Justice, using the bulk of my estate to create a comprehensive advocacy program for seniors facing family exploitation. The foundation provides legal assistance, counseling services, and educational programs designed to help elderly people recognize and respond to abuse. My story became part of the training materials for social workers, attorneys, and healthcare providers who work with elderly clients. Speaking engagements at senior centers, legal conferences, and healthcare facilities allowed me to share my experience and help others recognize the warning signs of elder abuse. I also donated my house to the local domestic violence shelter with the stipulation that it be converted into transitional housing, specifically for elderly women who had experienced abuse. The idea that the home where I would nearly lost my independence would become a sanctuary for other vulnerable seniors felt like perfect justice. I moved into Sunrise Manor, an active senior community where I quickly became involved in their resident advocacy council. My experience with financial manipulation and legal abuse made me a valuable resource for other residents who were struggling with family conflicts or questionable care decisions. The daily routine at Sunrise Manor suited me perfectly. Morning coffee with friends who valued my conversation and perspective afternoon. Activities that challenged my mind and kept my body active. Evening gatherings where I could share my story with residents who were facing their own family challenges. The community pool where I swam laps every morning, proving to myself and everyone else that I was far from the declining old woman Jessica and Michael had tried to create. Most importantly, I was surrounded by people who respected my autonomy and treated me as a capable adult rather than a burden to be managed. The staff at Sunrise Manor consulted me about decisions affecting my care, included me in planning my activities, and recognized my right to make choices about my own life. It was everything that Jessica and Michael had planned to take away from me. The irony wasn't lost on me that their attempt to steal my assets had resulted in those assets being used to protect other vulnerable seniors for decades to come. Their greed had become the seed money for justice on a scale much larger than my individual case. I received letters occasionally from Michael during his incarceration. They were filled with self-pity and requests for money for commissary items, along with vague suggestions that he had been misunderstood and that Jessica had manipulated him into participating in her plan. I never responded. The son I had raised and loved had died the day he decided to drug my tea and steal my independence. I had learned not to mourn people who were still breathing, but had chosen to become strangers. Jessica never contacted me at all, which was probably for the best. I hoped that prison would give her time to reflect on how she had corrupted her medical training and nursing skills into tools of abuse. But I doubted she had that level of self-awareness or genuine remorse. 3 years later, I was invited to speak at the annual conference of the National Center on Elder Abuse. Standing at the podium, looking out at an audience of advocates, attorneys, and healthcare providers, I felt a sense of purpose I had never experienced before. Age is not a disability, I told them. Needing some assistance with daily tasks doesn't mean losing the right to make decisions about our own lives. And when someone's love comes with conditions, when their care comes with control, when their help comes with the expectation of gratitude for abuse, You are not dealing with family. You are dealing with predators who happen to share your DNA. The standing ovation that followed wasn't just for my words, but for every elderly person who had ever been underestimated, manipulated, or discarded by people who should have protected them. Now, at 75, I have never been happier or more fulfilled. My days are filled with purpose, meaningful relationships, and the deep satisfaction that comes from using my experience to help others. The foundation has prevented hundreds of elder exploitation cases and helped thousands of seniors maintain their independence and dignity. I serve on the board of 3 different advocacy organizations, mentor other seniors who are dealing with family conflicts, and continue to speak publicly about the realities of elder abuse. My story has been featured in documentaries, academic research, and training programs used across the country. Sometimes people ask if I regret exposing Michael and Jessica, if I wish I had tried to handle things differently within the family. The answer is always an emphatic no. When someone shows you who they really are, believe them the first time. When someone's version of love requires you to surrender your autonomy and dignity, that is not love at all. I think about alternative timelines sometimes. What would have happened if I hadn't come home early that day? If I hadn't overheard their conversation, if I had continued drinking the drugged tea and accepting their version of my decline, would they have succeeded in their plan? Would I have spent my final years confused and controlled, believing I was losing my mind while they systematically stole my life? But then I remember that survival wasn't accidental. I survived because I refused to accept their narrative about my capabilities. I survived because I trusted my own judgment over their manipulation. I survived because I had the courage to fight back, the intelligence to plan my counterattack, and the determination to see justice done. My greatest victory wasn't defeating Michael and Jessica. It was discovering that the strong, capable woman I had always been was still there, still fighting, still protecting, not just myself but others who needed an advocate. Age had given me wisdom, patience, and perspective. These weren't weaknesses to be exploited, but weapons they never saw coming because they were too blinded by their own greed and prejudice to recognize the strength they were trying to steal. The best revenge isn't just survival, it is transformation. Taking the worst thing that has ever happened to you and turning it into the foundation for helping others avoid the same fate. That is exactly what I did, and I have never looked back. To anyone reading this who might be facing similar challenges with family members, who view their aging as an opportunity rather than deserving of respect, trust your instincts. Document everything that seems suspicious. Seek help from professionals who understand elder abuse and can provide legal protection. Connect with advocacy organizations in your community. Most importantly, remember that your age is not a liability or a source of shame. You have decades of experience, wisdom, and strength that younger people cannot comprehend. Don't let anyone convince you that needing some assistance means surrendering your right to make decisions about your own life. The foundation I established now helps over 1,000 seniors each year navigate family conflicts, legal challenges, and exploitation attempts. We provide free legal consultations, counseling services, and advocacy support. We also maintain a network of volunteer mentors, other seniors who have faced similar challenges and can provide guidance and emotional support. My story has become part of a larger movement to change how society views aging and elder care. Instead of seeing older adults as burdens to be managed or resources to be exploited, we are working to establish a culture that values wisdom, respects autonomy, and provides support without sacrificing dignity. Every week, I receive letters and emails from seniors who have read my story and found the courage to stand up to family members who were taking advantage of them. Some have discovered financial exploitation, others have recognized emotional manipulation, and many have simply realized that they don't have to accept disrespect or control from anyone, regardless of family relationships. These connections have become the most meaningful part of my new life. Knowing that my experience has helped even one person maintain their independence and dignity makes everything I went through worthwhile. The house where Michael and Jessica planned my destruction has been transformed into a beautiful transitional facility for elderly women escaping abuse. The rooms where they discussed stealing my independence now provide safety and support for women who are rebuilding their lives after exploitation. The kitchen where Jessica prepared my drug tea now serves nourishing meals to residents who are healing from betrayal and learning to trust again. I visit the facility regularly, not as a benefactor checking on her donation, but as a volunteer who understands exactly what these women have experienced. We share stories, offer support, and remind each other that surviving abuse isn't just about getting through the experience, it is about reclaiming the power and dignity that someone tried to steal. Some of the women are in their 60s, exploited by adult children who saw their aging parents as opportunities for financial gain. Others are in their 70s and 80s, manipulated by caregivers, family members, or supposed friends who gradually assumed control over their lives. All of them have learned the same painful lesson I did, that age makes us vulnerable to people who mistake our need for some assistance as an opportunity for total control. But they have also learned what I learned, that vulnerability isn't the same as helplessness, and that asking for help doesn't mean surrendering the right to make decisions about our own lives. The Foundation's impact extends far beyond individual cases. We have helped draft legislation strengthening penalties for elder abuse, established training programs for healthcare workers and social service providers, and created educational materials that help families understand the difference between supportive care and controlling behavior. Our research has documented patterns of elder exploitation that were previously unrecognized, particularly the sophisticated financial and psychological manipulation tactics used by family members who gradually assume control over elderly relatives. This information is now used by law enforcement, legal professionals, and advocacy organizations across the country. Perhaps most importantly, we have helped change the conversation about aging and independence. Instead of automatically assuming that older adults need to be managed and protected from their own decisions, more families and professionals are learning to provide support while respecting autonomy. Looking back on everything that happened, I realized that Michael and Jessica's betrayal, as painful as it was, ultimately led me to a more meaningful and fulfilling life than I could have imagined. The quiet retirement I had planned, tending my garden, reading books, visiting with a few close friends, has been replaced by a life of purpose, advocacy, and connection with people who truly value what I have to offer. I am no longer just Henry's widow or Michael's mother. I am Eleanor Patterson, elder advocate, survivor, and proof that underestimating someone because of their age is a dangerous mistake. I am living evidence that our later years can be our most powerful, most meaningful, and most impactful. The Foundation continues to grow, now operating in 12 states with plans for national expansion. Our legal advocacy program has helped thousands of seniors protect their assets and maintain their independence. Our counseling services have provided healing and support for families dealing with the aftermath of elder abuse. Our educational programs have trained thousands of professionals to recognize and respond to exploitation. But beyond all the statistics and success stories, what matters most to me is the individual connections, the conversations with other survivors, the mentoring relationships with seniors who are just beginning to recognize their own strength. The quiet moments when someone realizes they don't have to accept disrespect or control from anyone. These are the victories that matter. These are the moments that prove our lives have value beyond what we own or what we can provide for others. These are the connections that remind us that aging isn't about decline and dependency. It is about wisdom, experience, and the ongoing opportunity to make a difference in the world. What an incredible journey of survival, justice, and transformation. Eleanor's story shows us that our later years can be our most powerful and meaningful. If this resonated with you or reminded you of someone who needs to hear this message, please share it. Elder abuse affects millions of seniors, and awareness really can save lives. Have you or someone you love dealt with family manipulation or elder exploitation? Your experience in the comments could help someone else recognize the warning signs. And if you would like to hear more stories about courage, justice, and people who refuse to be victims, let me know what topics interest you most. Sometimes the best revenge is living well and helping others do the same.